Good morning, assalamu alaikum. Thank you everyone for joining us today on our monthly Congressional Town Hall meeting. And today we are blessed to have with us Congressman Bill Foster from the 11th Congressional District here in Illinois. He is he is now in his 5th term serving the 11th District. He previously served under from 208 to 211 as well. Congressman Foster currently serves on the Financial Services Committee, the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology, and the Select Committee on the Coronavirus Crisis. I would like to share with you once again the whole purpose of us gathering here today. In conducting these town hall series, the purpose is to increase our civic engagement, to be aware of the issues that confront us as a nation, whether it's on or as a state or on the local level, and to meet with our elected representatives here. Particularly, this is a congressional series, to meet with our federal elected officials to understand the issues that they're working on, understand issues we would like to present to our concerns, and ultimately learn how we as a community can work with our elected officials to push forth those policies that are best for our community and the nation as a whole. As I stated, I've given a overall introduction to our honorary guest this morning, Congressman Bill Foster. And at this point in time, I would turn the platform over to you, Congressman Foster.
Well, thank you. Well, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Congressman Bill Foster. I'm a scientist and a businessman, and I'm proud to represent the 11th Congressional District of Illinois in the House of Representatives of the United States. I'm really honored to be with you today to update you on some of our work in Washington and in the 11th District, and just to answer your questions. I want to particularly thank Shafiq Abu Bakr for inviting me here today, as well as the entire Congressional Islamic Organization of Greater Chicago for hosting and facilitating these important conversations. The past few years have been tumultuous, to say the least, and I am glad that we are beginning to move past and to heal from both the COVID-19 pandemic and some of the trauma of the last few years. And I'm especially grateful now that we have a leader in the White House, President Biden, who is significantly more competent and compassionate than his predecessor. The new leadership in Washington, D.C. has made focusing on important legislative matters much easier for members of Congress. And in particular, I was proud to vote for the American Rescue Plan, which brought much needed relief to businesses, families, and institutions that were and still are struggling due to the strain of the pandemic across the country and in our district. And I also have some updates for you regarding the 11th District. Just last week, the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee announced that they had selected 8 11th District transportation projects, which I had submitted for funding consideration as part of the committee's member-designated community-supported project initiatives. These projects will help reduce traffic congestion throughout the district, improve our roads overall, and fund a pilot program through Metro for zero-emission commuter trains. Delivering federal resources to the 11th District will always be one of my top priorities, and funding for important transportation and infrastructure projects is no exception. It is well past time that we make critical investments in the local transportation infrastructure that our communities rely on every day. Additionally, committees in Washington have been hard at work. The committees that I serve on, the Financial Services Committee and the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, have been holding hearings and pulling together legislation that will improve the lives of the American people now and into the future. And one of the things I've been leading the push on is for research and pilot programs for a digital dollar. This is also, well, that's a big thing. Happy to talk about that. And also advocating for more funding for research, which will be crucial to our our country, just making a good future for itself. And I am looking forward to delving more into my work and answering all your questions in the upcoming discussion. And so thank you all for having me, and let's move on to the Q&A part of the discussion.
Well, thank you for those opening remarks. It's good to have understand what you've been working on and how you've been advancing the interests of those of us who reside here in the 11th Congressional District. Well, I would like to open up the questions on a very fundamental issue, and that's the right to vote. First, our constituency thanks you for co-sponsoring HB 1, the People's Act, and for being a strong supporter of citizens' right to vote. The question, though, is this: now, what do you see as the policy obstacles to the passage of the HB 1 in the Senate? It seems it's stalled. So what do you see as the obstacles, and what do you see as the estimate for success in its present form being passed?
Well, the big news that happened in the last week or so is that one of the Democratic votes we need, Senator Manchin of West Virginia, announced he wasn't going to support it. All right, and so then the question then says, devolves to the question is, are there subsets of this? I don't think it would necessarily be bad to bring up every single provision. If you go through all of the provisions of HR 1 and then ask the American public, is this a good idea? Should Congress pass it? The answer is yes, 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 by numbers between 60 to 70% or above on every one. And so it's being blocked, among other ways, by the filibuster, even having a debate on this. And so one of the things that there's a very active discussion on is what modifications, if any, should be made to the filibuster, which prevents many of these popular things like universal background checks. The filibuster really, from time to time, has been a very important defense of the rights of minorities in the United States. More frequently, it has been something which suppressed the rights of minorities. If you look at the historical past, the abuse of the filibuster is one of the things that delayed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 for generations. And this is something that is aggravated by the fact that the Senate, by design, is a deeply non-representative body. A body in which all states have equal votes, not all people, but all states, means that there's a factor of 50 in the weight of an individual citizen's vote in the U.S. Senate, depending on whether you come from Wyoming or come from California. And then, if even in the aggregate, the Senate is a body in which 18% of Americans have a majority vote. The 26 smallest states, lowest population states, get to have their way. And unfortunately, many of these of the low population states tend to be rural, southern, and sort of reactionary in many of their attitudes. And the senators that represent those, unfortunately, are overrepresented in the Senate. And so that we struggle, and have been for generations, in how to maintain social progress and human rights, and many of the things that historically the Senate has been highly skeptical of. How do we do that? In favor of the filibuster is the fact that one of the biggest problems, design problems of any democracy, is how you deal fairly with the rights of the minority. This is a problem in the U.S. House of Representatives, in the Senate, or in India, where you're very, very familiar with the problems that the minority Muslim population in India is having. Democracy cannot be a mechanism to crush the minority just because you can, just because you have the majority vote. And so that's a delicate balance to make sure that the rights of minorities of whatever kind are respected without giving them the ability to block all progress. And that's what you're balancing on the filibuster. Of all the different proposals that I have that I've heard about in the last 6 months, and many of them have been proposed for a long time of what you do about the filibuster. The one that strikes me as the one that's most worth trying right now is to maintain the 60-vote threshold for a filibuster, but simply require that right now it takes 60 votes to cut off debate. What should be required instead is 40 votes to continue debate, so that if there is something that the minority really feels strongly about, they have to muster 40 senators every 12 hours or every 6 hours. It would be sort of like having a newborn baby, for those of you familiar with this problem, where you'd have to get out of bed, go and vote and say, I care so much about it that we should keep debating it. And so, for example, I think Democrats would be willing to do that in the current configuration to prevent a really bad justice from being appointed to a court. And because it's something we really care about, and we would get up multiple times in the middle of the night to make that happen. On the other hand, if it's something where you're using the filibuster to thwart the will of the American people, like universal background checks, then what would happen is that you'd have this ongoing story that the Senate is now in its 75th hour of where Republicans are insisting on blocking a vote on universal background checks. And so that they would be faced with a drumbeat of stories in the press that the Republican Party is blocking something that the American public feels strongly in favor of. And so I think that would be a useful first step, to not make it about, just, you can't have just one crazy person like Ted Cruz sitting there, reading Green Eggs and Ham all night. That doesn't give you, you can always muster one crazy person. But if you had a real requirement for 40 senators to make that commitment, I think that would be, that would really accomplish what the filibuster was intended to do. There was some debate, some respect for the rights of minorities, but make with some assurance that it's something they really care about and are willing to explain themselves to the American people when that's happening. So under those circumstances, then what I would like to see is one by one, every provision of HR 1 come up. I would like to see, the Senate, all right, take, I don't know, gerrymandering, all right, which is universally hated. It's like 85% of the American people think that we should not be doing this. It generates these really ugly maps, and people look at those maps and, they don't know all the details, but they sort of know they're being worked out of their vote. And so, so if you had the anti-gerrymandering provision of HR 1, just schedule a vote. And if the Republicans want to go on for hours and hours and hours, and days, explaining to the public why they don't think it's a good idea to get rid of gerrymandering, so be it. And I think that would actually generate a healthier debate. And I think that what you'd see is that because these individual provisions of HR 1 are so popular, that you would rapidly get compromise for something that would, that would pass muster on both sides of the aisle. So that's what I'd like to see. So I'll tell you when I start running for Senate. Because right now, we don't play in their rules and they don't play in our rules, but we all have opinions on how our government could work better.
Understood. But a lingering or a corollary question to this is, now that we're seeing states like Georgia, Texas, and other states putting limitations on the right to vote in terms of access to absentee voting or mail-in ballots, time the polls will be open. And there's concern, particularly at this moment of divisiveness that we see in our country, where how do we get more people to the polls to actually exercise their right to vote? And these seem to be roadblocks. So how will House Bill 1 respond to this, and or to the extent it cannot, what do you see as a policy positions that we as citizens should be taking to try to assure that the right to vote remains unfettered?
Yeah, well, the biggest effect, if you look at what has affected turnout in recent elections, is that when everyone got excited and involved in politics, the turnout went way up. All right. And the challenge there is to continue that high level of engagement. And that's one that I want to thank you for continuing that engagement with um, with everyone we can, because it's not just let's go do a big get out the vote uh, thing at the last 2 weeks of the election. That's useful, but it's not really the long-term progress. The long-term progress comes from engaging people, from the youngest before they even have the right to vote to elderly people unhappy with how they've been treated all their lives, to just go and get involved in politics. And that has to happen, at all levels in all communities. So that's the first line of defense. Second, now there are a lot of these targeted things that are just indefensible. The and it's a little mixed up because there was a lot of emergency measures that came about because of COVID that are arguable. That are some of them were pre-existing practices in Democratic and Republican states, and some were not. So I view that as sort of evidence that some of these things, like the exact length of early voting. I don't think that there's any magic principle that says anything less than 2 weeks of early voting is a violation of the Constitution. And I think it is not unreasonable to give the states some leeway in that, personally. But if the states are going to abuse the leeway we give them, then you need national standards for things like that. Universal automatic registration. When you get a driver's license, you get registered. I think that is just a good idea, and opposition to that really is, it's a partisan power play. That one is. But there's one thing actually that I'm working on that's I think if we succeed, I think will be very impactful, is that one of the successful ways to suppress voter turnout is with ID laws, voter ID laws. And what this does is that this, if you think of who is it in our society that does not have, driver's licenses or a state ID, they tend to be the elderly, the very poor, people with no strong connection to society or our government. And that's something where we can do better, frankly. And one of the things that we are likely to do is to have a universal broadband, a right in this country, so that no matter how poor you are, no matter where you are in life, you have the right to at least a basic broadband connection and a basic device, low-end cell phone. And so if you bundle this with the so-called digital driver's licenses that allow you to assert your identity as a single registered, legal human being, then this does a tremendous amount towards preventing identity fraud and making it easier for people with marginal connections to society to assert the rights that come with being a citizen of the United States, like voting, like basic public benefits, like the right to an internet connection. And so that this is something where the Republicans and the Democrats very quietly are coming into violent agreement. That I think the universal broadband spending that's under discussion, the Republicans are saying numbers like $65 billion, and Democrats are saying it should be 100 billion. But that is a number that will converge in a way that will, I think, provide the very important right of all citizens of the United States to have a connection to the broadband, and I hope bundled with that a way to legally assert their identity. Even for people who are not marginally connected, the whole problem with identity fraud is horrible. That people are just sick and tired of having to swap out their credit cards every time someone steals the number, and they're sick and tired of every time they go to some clinic. They have to go fill out all these forms with information they know is already on 6 other computers, because we don't have a way to authenticate ourselves as a single medical patient and bring all the information together. So these are things that happen in other countries. Good free democracies of the world can operate without without a privacy invasion from this. And that's something I think that we're going to see progress on, and it'll be transformative in a lot of your day-to-day life. Um, I'm sure many of you who've ever wired money from different bank accounts are probably creeped out at how little identification you have to provide to transfer around, a lot of money. And it's no surprise there's a lot of fraud going on. And providing a high quality way to authenticate yourself online will have a huge benefit to, um, to all Americans.
That's great. I mean, good to understand that this is a good policy direction that's being taken by both parties. It's just coming to a meeting of the minds.
Yep. Well, what's happened is that the Republicans largely come from rural areas, and they go back home and they see people living out in trailers way far away, not connected with very bad broadband, and they say, "What can I do to help these people?" And one of those things is broadband. And then many Democrats come from urban areas. Like I represent South Joliet, and there's areas in South Joliet with pretty bad internet connections, and a lot of people that um, can't afford them, and that shouldn't happen in the United States. When you see kids falling farther behind because their family doesn't have a good internet connection, and so this is another, maybe one of the only good things about COVID is that it brought forth, just made it blindingly obvious to both parties that that's part of, for everything from telemedicine to remote education to continuing education for adults who've had the job market changed out from under them and want to um, move up on the supply chain for jobs.
Well, I'm funny because those remarks kind of leads into the next question. When we look at the effects of the pandemic on the economy, particularly marginalized groups, and I want to tie that into your opening remarks about the 8 projects that you have successfully navigated here for the 11th district. And I guess is we have many small businesses, particularly in our community in the 11th district, that contractors and vendors. What information can you share with the audience about how could the small businessman business person participate in these coming projects, assuming they're going to get
Yeah,
final approval?
that's right. Yeah, and so the exact status, I don't want to overpromise here, is that usually the toughest thing is to get it through the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, and then with a general agreement that it will come up for a vote. And I'm confident that the House will pass this, and I think we'll probably get a fair number of Republican votes, because it turns out that there are lots of potholes in Republican districts that need repair and bridges that need repair as well. And so so I suspect that it will definitely pass out of the House, and then trying to figure out what the Senate does is it's a tough thing. Trying to psychoanalyze senators is, in my experience, not a winning game. And whether they will raise some last minute objection that causes half or all of these to disappear, I simply can't guarantee. But these are the transportation projects that we got are things that we included because they had the highest level of community support, and they had good engineering designs and estimates behind them. And these will result in the projects going out for bid using the local bidding project, which have very carefully constructed guarantees that if you're going to use federal fund, you have to make the ability to bid on these, widely available, and you can't just turn it around and give the projects to the same old companies that have always gotten them. And so that's going to be important. And then there will be subcontractors as well. And there are also important federal rules, making sure that fair wages are paid, that workers are not misclassified, and many other things like that. So I hope if you have a small firm that is thinking of, that is not yet on the bidders list for these projects, please contact our office, and we can and we'll show you the ropes and how to become a qualified bidder on these things. Because there's going to be a lot of money put into this, not only now but in the future. So
And that's really the crux of the question, because there have been many businesses that have suffered tremendously from the COVID, and they're once again, when you start talking about essential services and those that support essential services, some have come to an end or are struggling to survive, and is trying to see how maybe, if not each of these individual capital infrastructure projects, but what other kinds of projects that can enable these small businesses here in the 11th district to participate and fulfill the whole purpose of the American Rescue Plan. So
there's another big indirect benefit. A lot of these are just reconstructing. For example, the parts of New York Avenue that connect Naperville and Aurora. And so that's an area where, because the road itself wasn't that attractive, it was very hard to get many of the struggling small businesses to really invest or new investment into those areas. Weber Road is one of the main north-south corridors, and there's sections of Weber Road that are going to be fixed up with lots of new commercial opportunities for a better class of retail or a new class of retail into these areas. And so that even though there may not be a direct benefit, what you'll see is the economy growing in the area because of the improvements to the infrastructure.
Understood. Let me, if I can, switch to another big problem in our society today, and that's relates to gun violence. I mean, we've witnessed a lot of mass shootings, and then oftentimes these mass shootings are using these assault rifles, the AK-15, and they have much more powerful, at least range, shooting capacity.
And the enormous ammo clips are indefensible.
Exactly.
If you're using this for self-defense, you do not need 30 rounds.
Well, and once again, and I know we're getting into the debate about infringement on the Second Amendment, but nonetheless, just to be clear and share what is your position on banning assault weapons?
No, I've supported it for many years, and it's just it did a lot of good. And when you look at other countries like Australia, which had a problem with mass murders, and they said this is ridiculous, and they banned assault weapons, and the number of mass murders in Australia went down a lot. And so I think this is I think it also sends a bad signal about sort of the glorification of gun ownership in a way that is not healthy, particularly for the young males who are responsible for so much of the mass murders that take place in this. If they say, oh, this is a way to be a big, powerful man, is to own a big, powerful gun, that actually, it causes trouble. Because as someone, you and I probably both went through being a young man and all the mental instability that goes with that. and so you just don't need this sort of seductive menace of a military style assault rifle as one of your legitimate options to prove your manhood.
Agreed.
That's
one
of the reasons.
I'm sorry. As you look at the two House bills that are addressing gun registration, and you're clear your support of both HB 1446 and HR 8, do you see gun registration as a tool that could curtail access to these the assault weapons?
Well, first off, you need, a definition of what kind of weapon is too dangerous for a citizen to own. And this is something where we have taken the Second Amendment and just twisted it beyond recognition. If you look at the time of the Founding Fathers, when the Second Amendment was put into place, they knew that some weapons were too dangerous for citizens to have. For example, Revolutionary War cannon was only something that was allowed to be possessed by an organized militia. as if you were just some farmer out there, you could not get a cannon. And the reason is that cannons, even back then, were capable of killing a large number of people, at one shot. And so if you just sort of, do the calculation of how many people per minute can be killed by someone with a Revolutionary War cannon, you need about a 3-man crew. And if you're really good, you can fire it about twice a minute, if you're really, really good. And a single shot can kill a handful of people. So you do that calculation and you can say, how many people can be killed, per person per minute with something that was felt to be too dangerous to put in private hands. And then if you compare how many people you can kill with a modern assault weapon, it's not even close. That there's more than a factor of 10 higher rate of people that you can kill per minute from an assault weapon. And so I think this is something that clearly would have been over the line at the time of the founding fathers. And we have to simply restore some sanity to this thing and understand that there's a real difference between what you need for legitimate self-defense, what you might need for hunting, which is not, if you need 50 rounds to take down whatever it is you're shooting at, you need to have some lessons in how to fire a gun. And so we simply, have to draw more sensible lines there. I think there are some people who are absolutists on this that say, and all weapons should be okay. That it's perfectly fine if you have fragmentation grenades or IEDs or, tactical nuclear weapons, if that really is that the line, because it's the line that's being drawn by many of those. If you read through some of the social media chatter up to this assault on the Capitol, they were, many of these were absolutists on ownership of arms. They viewed that the reason that we possess arms is so that we can overthrow our government. They view that's what's called the insurrectionist reading of the of the Second Amendment. That's not what it was about. Because in reality, if people should have enough arms to defeat the United States Army, they're going to need tactical nuclear weapons to do so. All right, and I don't think many people support that. So that we really have to understand that when people are talking about how the Second Amendment protects us, protects our democracy, they are talking about assassination. They are not talking about defeating the U.S. Army. And our country has suffered enough from assassination, so that we have to be, take a hard line against the insurrectionist reading of the Second Amendment. It has no place in our democracy historically or at the present time.
Thank you. Thank you for those remarks. Congressman Foster, I'm going to switch now to a couple of two issues of concern to the community here in the 11th District, the Muslim community, as it bears on the situation in India and in Palestine. So early last year, you gratefully joined us at the Muslim Association of Bolingbrook, where we kind of had an opportunity to share some insights on it. And I know this was an issue that came fresh on, or at least to your plate, something that's going beyond the 11th District, primarily generated by the number of constituents in your that are directly impacted by families and that are still living in India, that are being subject to the level of violence there. So I would like to introduce once again the former chair of the Muslim Association, Pittsburgh, Amr Abdul Jalil. He is here, and just as a follow-up question to how do you see this? What position your office has taken? So, Amr, if you could ask Congressman Foster the question.
Hi, Congressman Foster. Good to see you again. Good to talk to you again. I think we last met just before the pandemic. As you remember, my name is Amr Abdul Jalil, and I'm the past president of the Muslim Association of Bolingbrook. We had a pretty good turnout that day from community members that were voicing their concerns and some fears that we saw trickling into our own district and our own communities with some of the changes that took place in India. specifically led by the Hindutva movement with the RSS movement there. And now I think, aside from the 225 million Muslims that are impacted in India with this Hindutva movement and rise against, against Islam, we actually needed your support on this area to voice, this at a national level. But now we're also directly impacted within our own district because we're seeing some of those issues take place within, our constituency. Projects that are kind of in jeopardy, specific to the Naperville Mosque, expansion project, where a lot of these feelings have kind of come about. And
no, that's interesting. I had, without studying the nature of the opposition to that, was it coming from the Hindu community or the Christian community or everyone?
So yeah, so we
Hindu component to that opposition. Yeah, it had not occurred to me. I was just wondering if that's something that makes sense.
Yeah, Congressman, I actually, and to be pretty frank about it, there were, kind of a series of town hall meetings that were taking place because we, 1 or 2 or 3 meetings were not enough to hear the opposition, and majority of that opposition did come from the Hindu community. Within
that's interesting. I was unaware of that.
So this is, just something, we feared, okay. And that's kind of the reason why we had invited you and given you the petitions, and because we as parents, we saw this kind of in a matter of time trickle into our own community. And as parents that, have kids going into the public school, it is a very, very big concern because that feeling is now coming into our own children and the environment that they're in, the surroundings that they're in. And parents are very, very concerned within our district, and we can have a separate town hall about this, but the question and the follow-up mainly was if you had a chance, since we last met at the Muslim Association of Bolingbrook, Congressman, to develop a position on this violence in the nation of India directed against minorities.
Yeah, well, I mean, the situation in Kashmir has been really terrible and inexcusable. And there were, I think, various letters of support. The business when they just sort of shut down the social media or the internet generally. Yes. And stuff like that is just very far from the way some government that calls itself a democracy should operate. And I had a number of very tense meetings on that subject, both with representatives of the Indian government and local groups as well. That's not, there's a related thing. We were talking about the business with having these digital driver's licenses. India has, I think, to their credit, set up a very good national identity system that will be very valuable. But against that, they apparently are using it to refuse citizenship to long-established Muslim minorities on the basis of being Muslim. And I don't know if that's gone away or if it's continuing. I haven't heard about it in at least, I guess probably pre-COVID, but it sounded like a really ugly thing that was happening there.
Very unfortunate, Congressman.
Yeah, is that actually continuing? They're proceeding with that, or have they backed off a little bit?
No, it's definitely continuing, and things have definitely changed, put it this way, at a global level on this front since we last talked about it at the Muslim Association of Bolingbrook when we handed you the petitions. And it's definitely got a lot worse. And some of the issues that are taking place directly, within our own district, I think it's very, very important that we sit down with the community leaders and kind of bring you, shed that light on.
Okay, yeah, because what got reported in the newspapers were, well, people objected to, there'd be too much traffic or, all these sort of spurious objections that made me think that there was something else behind it.
Yeah, there's definitely a big movement behind it. There were thousands and thousands of signatures that came in via the Hindutva RSS movement. And some of those signatures, which the Naperville Township is aware of, and the Naperville Council is aware of, is that a lot of those signatures came from overseas. And it's just a
Oh,
very strong.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, so these were,
very,
this
very
was
strong
an open petition that was online or something like that?
You know, it was within you know, the Naperville constituency, but the link obviously got shared and it went viral, and a lot of it was copy and paste, a very strong derogatory comments. And I think specifically the Naperville community has done a fabulous job of interfaith work.
Yeah, no, I've been very proud,
working, collaboration across the different that you know, they
that's
have
right.
set the
I remember
precedence.
it was the first time I had a chance to be really proud of what Naperville did was, after the Sikh gentleman was beaten up, who was just out walking and was beaten up by some person who apparently didn't know the difference between a Sikh and a Muslim and thought he was Muslim, but that we then had an interfaith meeting that was attended by everyone. And the community said, nope, this is not who we are or who we want to be or who we want our children to be.
Exactly.
So that's I continue to be impressed when I look at just groups of young kids. I live down on the Riverwalk on Naperville. And so my wife and I go out walking there, very often in the evening and see groups of kids, of all different faiths and all different languages but they're all mixed up. It's not like here's a group of, Eastern Europeans and here's a group of clear Muslims or other Indo-Americans. It's actually, and so it's one of the things that, gives me hope. Or when I go to a science fair and you'd see kids that I can pretty well, I'm not an expert, but I can pretty well tell, okay, that's the parents look Sikh, the parents look Muslim, the parents look, look Hindu, and they're sitting there arguing about, some robotics project they have or something like this. And that's the way to the future on this.
Yeah, and not only that, but you're absolutely right. Before this, before the ideology made it into our own district, I mean, we took a lot of pride in that diversity and in that collaboration. And I could tell you firsthand, I mean, being part of the Bolingbrook community, we're very, very closely connected to Naperville. We do a lot of
projects, that's right.
in collaboration. Our advisory panel, when we need them, they're there for us and vice versa. And I could tell you that this is really hitting hard within our children. This ideology is really hitting hard.
Are the kids buying it or not? Or is this just their parents going online?
The kids will believe everything that the parents tell them.
Oh, really? Wow, that's you must have a very different culture than I grew up in. The kids don't believe anything the parents say.
But fundamentally, when they hear these kind of things, right? When they hear these kind of things, these children are already forming stereotypes, right?
Yeah, well, the stereotypes do actually imprint on the younger.
Unfortunately, and like when I was a kid, it didn't matter, if you were from, Philippines, China, India, we were all friends, right? And we all respected each other's diversity. And it's very, very hard to kind of differentiate at that young level when you're from the same ethnicity and the background, and your mother tongue is the same. You're able to understand each other's language, share each other's food, clothing. It's all relatable, right? Now you are like, okay, he's actually a Muslim. He's not a good kid. We actually cannot keep.
Well, I'm just wondering whether the kids buy that to the same extent that their parents do.
The stereotypes, unfortunately, are being bought, and
okay, all right.
It does.
Well, I hope not by all of them, because
it does affect the children's psychology, the emotional state at a rise where mental and emotional illness is already a big concern. It doesn't help the situation. So definitely, we need your support to kind of look into this and to do what's needed to
well, also the group that is suffering right now are the East Asians, the people that are mistaken for being Chinese. There's a huge amount of anti-China sentiment, and
in the West Coast especially, right? On that front.
I
don't see that so much in our district.
I don't sense it that much in the Illinois 11th district. It's non-zero. Right. My wife is Korean, and she describes at the beginning of this outbreak how she felt uncomfortable going into grocery stores, and people would sort of stare at her in line, wondering if she was spreading the virus because, and it just, this stuff crops up again and again in our country's history. And
Richard, there is a question on the Q&A.
Yes. Just so it can kind of come around, because you see how that this problem has is now infiltrating in here, and even our society here in the United States. But more importantly, going back to the initial question is, the community was looking, or is looking, for your office to make some sort of, to make a statement of what policy positions you can assume to address these kind of issues. Once again, we know you're here to govern for and represent the interests of the 11th district. No question about it. We and members are here or there. But once again, United States holds itself as the model for the world of democracy, the protection of human rights, and our ask of you is, can you issue, or would you issue, a statement that denounces this kind of treatment of minorities? Because it's not just Muslims that are suffering.
Oh yeah, no, I have gone on the record in many ways. You know, the specific local projects. I don't have the time to get into all of the details, because sometimes it is about parking lots and traffic. But the fact that there have been many, or at least several attempts to locate mosques that have encountered local opposition sort of put my, put me on alert that this may be something happening again. I don't know if you noticed, I was very proud of where I voted I don't know if you noticed that, but it was, I think this was in the Trump election, where I think I then put out a little social media thing that said, I have been waiting for 4 years to vote against the Muslim travel ban. I tweeted and voted at the Islamic Center.
No, Congressman Foster,
it's
no
important.
mistake. Yeah. Make no mistake. We understand that your values align with the interests of our community, very much so. And and because we know you're a strong supporter, when you're looking for a voice, you're looking for an advocate. That's the whole reason turning to you to have a voice on this
Actually,
situation.
I had a question for you. What do you think of the Biden administration's response so far? Particularly to Modi. I mean, that is the thing that I have been looking carefully at. And I mean, he's got about 1 million things that they're trying to do. And so, but somewhere on that list should be doing something to encourage India to remain a democracy and a country that respects free speech and freedom of religion. And have you seen the pressure that I would hope they are gently going to be exerting in the next few years?
We would hope so, but they're similar to the situation that we saw recently in terms of Palestine and Jerusalem and Israel, the Gaza Strip. It was, we applaud that a ceasefire has been reached, and we applaud the statement that you've issued, detesting the violence, because what we're witnessing is the violation of human rights. And from our
look, I have grown less and less patient. In all of these things, you have to be super careful to separate your skepticism about a government and about the people. All right. And so there's a lot of confusion that often happens when you're unhappy with the policies of the government of Israel, as I am. They have been, to my mind, deliberately violating the Geneva Conventions, which include a ban on transferring population into areas that you take over by force. All right, that is just absolutely crystal clear. Israel, the government, has signed on to that, and Israel, the government, is had longstanding violations of that international agreement of the Geneva Conventions.
And when we frame the question, as you said, it's not against the people, but like I said, focusing in on the government, and we see the actions that are taken. That's why we're looking for our elected officials to voice it. This is not to get into clashes between religious ideologies, even whether we're talking about India or the nation of Israel. But when we see mass killings by bombs of hundreds of people, there has to be a humane, humanitarian response to that. And we, as I said, we appreciate the statement. The question is, how do you see us? What next steps? Like one thing we have is House Bill 2590 was introduced by Representative Betty McCollum to relative to the treatment, human rights treatment of Palestinian children by the military army of Israel. I mean, if we don't begin to frame the issues in terms of the wrongs and the harms being done, it will the wrongs will continue. And we're sharing those are how we're looking at it, and seeking your insight, how you're looking to develop it, and more importantly, how we can continue to support your efforts in these kinds of policies.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'll have to have my staff have a look at the McCollum bill, which I will you know, get back to you on. We'll
All right.
And
All
so on
right.
that specific one, but the you know the I mean, what we have to do is get well, first off, it is actually correct that Israel has a right to defend themselves. All right. But there has to be more proportionality in that defense, I think, than we've seen. And it's a, it's a problem. On many of the last wars, the casualty ratios on both sides have been differing by more than an order of magnitude, and sometimes two orders of magnitude. And that isn't a correct optimization from a humanitarian point of view. If you take the view that all human lives are created equal, even though governments may be responding differently to human rights, we have to, it's a big problem. And I think that we also have to do more to hold the Israeli government's feet to the fire, to follow through on their commitments to pursue a two-state solution, which they have not, to my mind, seriously pursued, and have done things that are really in the opposite direction to that. So and so that is the ultimate thing that we have to continue to push for.
Let me respond to your comments this way, in terms of how we as a community can work with you to advance some of these particular policy objectives. And first, I think, as we mentioned early on at the beginning of this series, the purpose of this is to not only to educate our community better and let them be more informed of civic responsibilities, but how they can participate in it. And I would first ask, like, are there particular advisory committees or things that you are seeking community's input that we could share with our constituency, to let them know, here's ways that Congressman Bill Foster feels that you can help make life better for everybody here in the 11th district. And then second is that my follow-up question or point would be, in terms of working, following up with your staff, and how we can move forward, at least to supply any additional information you may need from our community to help you best make fact-based decisions in formulation of your policy as it relates to the issue in India, or even in how forwarding this whole process of a two-state solution in Israel-Palestine.
Yeah. So your best contact, if you look in the chat, the best contact from my office is Hillary Danku, who is my district director in Illinois. And so, for things like just setting up meetings where we can have more, more detailed discussions of these issues. And I think the avenue where everyone should press forward is the interfaith and intercommunity efforts, at least to make it clear that, when there's a lot of vilification of any group, that the whole community is absolutely against it. And I think that that is something that cannot be said publicly or loudly enough. And so that's a very important part of this. And then there are, there are discussions that we are going to be having probably mainly in private with the Biden administration about what is the balance going to be, toward some of the Modi government's policies in India. How much of the political capital that we have, will be expended in, because you can't walk into a meeting with another government and say, I want you to change absolutely everything you do. You have to give them a small list of here's what's really important from our point of view. And, I hope that that the treatment of the Muslim minority in India is very high on that list. And we will be communicating that.
Well, we would appreciate you carrying that message to the president, as well as efforts, and however we can support that in terms of information we can share. We welcome that opportunity.
And so, yeah, my electronics are telling me I have to go get to my next Zoom here.
Understood. Hillary's doing a great job. She just reminded me, she says, you got to go.
Okay.
And so with that, I would thank you, Congressman Foster, for joining us this morning. It has been informative. We appreciate your candor and your concern for all the constituents here in the 11th District, and we look forward to finding ways to work more with you going forward. Thank you very much.
And thank you all.
All righty.